All right, Kathy, thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the community.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. I listened to a couple episodes of your podcast, and it's really exciting all the people you're getting to talk to. So, again, thanks for having me on. Um, I work as a staff attorney for the Center for Public Representation. It's a small Massachusetts-based nonprofit law firm, and we do a lot of disability rights as civil rights work, really focused on community integration and making sure that people have options and choices about where and how they spend their time. And that includes moving people out of institutions and into the community in a lot of our litigation efforts. I got into this work because I first started with Special Olympics in undergrad and then was looking for a summer opportunity and actually ended up working as a direct service provider in some group homes for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in hindsight, these homes, as far as group homes go, were doing things pretty well. They were smaller, 4 to 6 people. Everybody had their own room. You had some choices about, what to eat, when to eat, where to go, all these kinds of things that make it look a little more like a home than an institution. And yet, people didn't have choices in some really important aspects of their day-to-day life. There was one time that I was attending a medical appointment with one of the residents, and his insurance coverage for a name brand seizure medication had changed, and there was a very abrupt decision made for him to switch him to a generic version. And he ended up having a couple of breakthrough seizures with that switch. It wasn't a great situation, and everybody just kind of assumed that he was going to make this switch and nobody really talked to him about it or asked him about it. And this particular individual was employed and did have some income of his own. There certainly could have been a conversation about what he wanted to do, and it was just totally absent. And as at that point, a college student, it just really stuck with me that here was this person having this really major medical decision made for him, even in kind of a community and a place where there were a lot of choices. And I was like, if this is where we're doing it well, and this is what it looks like, what must it be like in some other places, and what must it be like for some other people? And that kind of started my journey towards the legal side of things and disability rights and, making sure that people get to be in the community if that's what they want.
hmm So what do you do as a staff attorney, like to advocate for people with disabilities?
Yeah, so at this organization, my role with CPR is basically to look around the country, and we get kind of complaints or issues spotted in a variety of different ways. But once we kind of identify a state system that might have some deficiencies or shortcomings, basically an institutional bias, then we use the laws to the best of our ability to go in and kind of our core is the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, and then a Supreme Court decision called Olmstead. And we kind of use those three core legal components to take a look mostly at state Medicaid systems and say, you're really forcing people into institutions because you may have some community services, but you don't have enough. Or you say they work this way, and people are telling us they don't work that way. And what this is leading to is people being stuck in nursing facilities or, other mental health type institutions or stuck in these segregated placements, where they're only seeing people with disabilities. It's institutional, it has all the trappings of an institution, and people aren't getting to make choices. They don't get to choose, when they eat, what they eat. I mentioned that earlier. Um, or, where to go, how to go. They can't use transportation. They're just really stuck in these places. And so we, again, try to leverage the law to say you need to make the community side of things equally as accessible and an equal option. And people shouldn't feel scared that their healthcare is going to fall through the cracks if they decide to move out into the community as opposed to staying in a nursing facility. So we've got cases all over the country. I personally am staffed on a couple that deal with nursing facilities, and was recently staffed on one dealing with a segregated school setting. But yeah, the kind of overarching theme of our work is community options should be just as available as institutional options.
Hmm. Because it's good that you mentioned that because here in Washington State where I'm at, I think I read a story once where they were trying to lawmakers were trying to decide whether to really help people in nursing homes or because they were concerned about, addressing the budget, and it's sort of this idea of like, do we cut this in order to save the budget? I feel like that's what's going on in my state at least. Is that the same thing that's going on where you're located or?
So I will say on the budget front, in Medicaid world, there's a principle called cost neutrality. So this is going to get a little bit wonky, but the way that the Medicaid program works, the Social Security Act requires that people have institutional placement available to them, and that is period across the country. This is the thing that if you need that nursing care, it's available to you in an institution. And then there's been this development of Medicaid waiver services, and that is a waiver to this requirement of institutional care that it can be provided. One type of waiver is in home and community-based settings, and these are the HCBS waivers. And one of the rules about these waivers, which provide nursing facility type services, but in people's homes and in the community, one of the rules about these waivers is you have to show that it costs the same or less than keeping somebody in the institution. And there are, we could go down a number of rabbit holes about how you show that and the details of how all of that works. But at a high level, all of these programs have shown once the program is established, it is equal or often cheaper to serve people in the community than it is to serve them in these institutions. So it is always fascinating when these budget conversations come up, uh, to kind of remind people of that little fact.
Hmm. So like when you sort of meet a client with let's switch gears. So when you meet a client with a disability that you're trying to figure out, how they can advocate for themselves, how do you sort of facilitate that sort of relationship and sort of that trust?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And CPR does things in a slightly different way. So we are very small. And as I said, based in Massachusetts, but I actually live in Asheville, North Carolina, and a number of my colleagues live in like the DC area. We have somebody in California. We're kind of all over the map. And our staff is very small. So, what we often do when we start to hear about states with potential issues is we partner with a boots on the ground, either grassroots nonprofit or another legal services provider. We often partner with the protection and advocacy organizations, the PNAs. Every state has one. And we really kind of look to those partners for leadership in identifying individuals that are having problems and building those relationships. We're pretty sensitive to the fact that while we know a lot about the law and how it works, it's really important to have those relationships in the community, in the home community, with people who live there also, to do this work and to make sure that whatever remedy we're asking for actually makes sense in that community. And so we look to, again, boots on the ground partners to kind of lead those relationships, and help us find individual plaintiffs. So most of our litigation is class action style, and so that means there will be a handful of people called named plaintiffs where we really get to know them, and they represent then a whole class of people that we think have similar problems. And we bring a lawsuit on behalf of all of those people, but only, maybe five or six people have their name associated with the lawsuit.
Hmm. So what I'm wondering is, like uh what um I guess like um what are some of the thing because every lawyer specializes in different things around like you know different cases, but what do you sort of like focus on specifically? I know that you touched that earlier, but to reiterate.
Yeah, absolutely. So CPR, where I am the firm, we have a couple of different kind of concentrations or categories of cases, I would say. And then we also have a couple of attorneys that do exclusively supported decision-making work around the country, really helping states and advocacy groups move away from traditional guardianship and towards a process that allows people to participate in decision making to the fullest extent possible. So, some of the other buckets where we do litigation efforts at CPR include supported employment. Um, I do a lot of nursing facility work, um, and all of these cases are connected back to that idea of don't segregate people, don't warehouse people in institutions, get them out into the community, whether that be where they live, where they go to school, where they work, etc. And then there's also kind of a split in Medicaid for kids versus adults. So we have a couple of cases that are under what's called EPSDT, early periodic diagnostic and screening. And this is the requirement for kids in Medicaid that they basically get testing and the health care that they need. And it's a much broader requirement than for adult Medicaid. So we have some kids Medicaid cases. In addition to the employment work and nursing facility work.
Hmm. Like, I'm wondering what goes into preparing for cases like in your case with nursing homes and stuff. Like, what does it take to sort of prepare, write up, whatever arguments you want to argue in front of the court? What's the process preparation like?
Yeah, so first of all, every time I get involved in a nursing facility case, I learn something new. There are an incredible number of, regulations. So, I'm sure you know this, but just to kind of level set, there are statutes that are passed by Congress, and often those statutes then come with instructions that an administrative agency, so for example, like Health and Human Services or the CMS, the Center for Medicaid Medicare Services, is going to write regulations. So the statutes are pretty short and they have big, broad statements about how Congress wants the world to work. And then they send it off to the administrative agencies to make regulations, basically operationalizing, implementing those big ideas and making it like practical instructions for how it's supposed to work. So there are any number of regulations that nursing facilities that take Medicaid or Medicare dollars have to comply with. And just to use an example, there's some regulations about person-centered planning. And it says if somebody comes into this nursing facility, you have to sit down with them face to face every so often and talk about whether or not they want to leave. And you have to involve their chosen supporters. You have to ask them all these questions about, what's going on at the facility. And if they indicate interest in transitioning to the community, you're supposed to help set them up with a transition planner and start moving that process along. And this is, one of many, many, many federal regulations. So if we were to hear, that there was a state with a lot of nursing facilities, not a lot of movement, community services weren't really coming together. People were feeling stuck in nursing facilities. That might be one very small area that we would take a look at. Well, are they doing person-centered planning? Are they actually asking people in a meaningful way whether they want to leave the facility? Because if you just go up to somebody and say, well, do you want to leave or do you want to stay here where you have your nurses? Right? People are going to say, I want to stay here where I have my nurses. And
Yeah.
so, um, even in just that very small, narrow area, we're talking about informed choice and how are you presenting information? Is it culturally and linguistically competent, the way that you're presenting people's choices? Are you involving other people that they lean on for support in decision making if they have trouble making decisions on their own? And really making sure that, again, this like one little federal reg out of all of them, that it's actually being implemented in a way that means something to people, not just in a way that checks a compliance box. Um, and so, there are any number of little kind of avenues like that in the nursing facility landscape. And we're looking to see, is this, again, happening for people in a way that is meaningful and is actually going to allow people to transition safely and confidently to the community in the way that they want to? Or are we checking boxes, or in some instances, not even getting to the box checking, just ignoring it altogether? So
Mm-hmm.
that's my best effort at explaining how we get started.
Yeah. What I was getting at is like, I guess my next question is, what have you what's sort of the feedback that you've gotten from like working with clients? What has been sort of the response? Have they been like, oh, I'm glad that you've helped me advocate on this? What was that experience like?
Um, I will say it is pretty incredible when we see um, people who have allowed us to list them as named plaintiffs, because it's a commitment, right? Your name is on something that is getting reported on in the press. Um, and it's kind of a mixed bag, honestly, as a plaintiff, to be the named plaintiff for a class action versus just trying to find a lawyer to take your individual case. Because in some instances, you get more attention, so you get better services, and in some instances, you might have gotten faster relief just doing your own thing over here. And so for our named plaintiffs in particular, we are just immensely grateful basically for their service to the whole class. And when we do finally see these people transitioning out of, we'll stick with nursing facilities for now, but when we see these people transitioning out and getting into homes for the first time, and the things that they describe doing and the things that make them so happy. We just recently had a named plaintiff in one of our lawsuits in Massachusetts move into a group home setting, and she was cooking for herself in the kitchen for the first time in years. And that was something that she had really enjoyed. And it's something that I think a lot of people just take for granted. And so, yeah, having these conversations with people now that they're able to do things that are just a normal part of day-to-day life for so many people, and it's now an option for them again. It's a little bit sobering, but it's also just a really beautiful thing.
hmm I think my last question in all of this is like, I know that earlier you mentioned that you guys are a small organization, but how can other organizations model you as kind of like a blueprint for how to advocate for people who may not have voice, for people with disabilities, people in nursing homes like you just alluded to. So what's your response, or could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there are a number of um, kinds of like nonprofits or groups that I think are present pretty much nationwide, um, that I would encourage people, if they're seeing issues like this, to check locally, first of all, just to see. So the Centers for Independent Living are a great resource, and I think around nationwide, like I said, every state has a protection and advocacy organization, a PNA, and they are statutorily mandated to monitor institutions in the state that they're in. And so that's a great place to see, kind of what they have going on. And if you have an issue that's not on their radar, putting it on their radar, so that they can take a closer look. They have special access authority to institutions. So if there is suspected, neglect or abuse, or fraud going on, they can get in the front door and take a look pretty expeditiously, which is really nice, especially if you've got kind of an emergent situation. You know, at the end of the day, kind of nationwide, we're hearing a lot of the same issues from state defendants, and that is workforce shortage and housing shortage. And so I think, the disability community needs to be working kind of intersectionally with, you know, housing agencies and housing rights nonprofits and that kind of thing. So I think looking for opportunities to work outside of the disability rights community, because these issues, housing and workforce shortage are issues for more than just the disability community. And, looking for solutions that appeal to multiple groups might get a little more traction. Um, and then as far as, kind of the systemic litigation that CPR does, there are a number of national nonprofits that kind of follow a similar model to what CPR does, where we're looking for, again, local partners that really know what's going on at a detailed, intimate, personal level. And then we kind of bring to the table litigation experience with deep experience with the ADA, with all those regulations I was talking about. And then we often try to partner with law firms, private law firms as well. And they're often willing to do some great pro bono work for us because it is expensive to litigate these kinds of cases. But they're also the kinds of cases that can get relief for hundreds, if not thousands, of people in a state with one lawsuit instead of doing it one person at a time. So yeah, as far as just advocating for yourselves, I think, knowing your P&A, knowing what nonprofits are doing work in your area, and not being afraid to like make that complaint and say, this is what's happening and talking about it. I think often there's a lot of either just, I've been fighting so hard for so long and this is just the way it is. And, it's really frustrating. I used to do a lot of individual advocacy for a legal services organization here in Asheville, and it's really hard when you've been told no 50 times to go and say the 51st time, this isn't right. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. And so I would just encourage people as they are able and as they have the energy for it to say it that 51st time. This isn't right. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. And hopefully you'll be able to match your complaint with somebody with the resources and the time to make that 51st time count. And, I don't want to be overly sunshine and rainbows about it because it is an incredibly uphill battle and frustrating. But when you can find, as I said about our named plaintiffs in particular, when you can find that match, incredibly powerful work gets done.
Mm-hmm. All righty.